There were many failed attempts to put together a plan and get a political agreement on how a comprehensive regional transit plan could look. And our project was the first project that finally did get the political approval of the 3 county leaders and the mayor of Detroit in December of 2008. And now what we've been working on for the last year is developing the governance, trying to develop a regional governance to like an authority to implement the plan, because it's a regional plan and you need a regional transit authority to implement a regional plan. John, do you have any?
I have a couple of questions, and it's really one question. BRT and ART, do you, in both cases, you pay before you get on?
The BRT, well, in either case, the plan for service would be is that you would have the option of buying or acquiring a monthly pass so that you wouldn't have to buy as you get on. BRT in particular, in the what we're calling stations as opposed to shelters, we would have kiosks at the shelters so that people can, from a variety of methods, purchase a ticket before they get on the vehicle.
I do have one other question. Years ago, during the visioning sessions, I asked a gentleman who, I'm not sure what his position was. He was involved in SEMCOG in some way, if I'm not mistaken. I asked him the difference in time between the Detroit River and Pontiac for BRT versus light rail. And at that time, he said about 6 minutes. Is that correct?
Between BRT and light rail, that's probably true, because first off, when you say BRT, and there's sort of Tiffany, we should probably know the answer better, but BRT is kind of flexible in how it's developed and how it's run, because BRT may have a few signal lights that it has to stop at, whereas light rail usually would not have to stop at any intersections. But Tiffany,
in addition to that, the light rail system, because of the design of that system, it's designed actually to have a lot more stops in a greater more dense area. So you're going to lose time because you have to stop so many times. The BRT usually go between about 1 mile to 2 miles between stops, so that gains you some time there, whereas you lose a lot of that time in the plan.
A group from Michigan Welfare Rights, there were 7 of us all together, went to Boston in order to examine their light rail and their bus rapid transit. One of the things that I noticed when we went to Boston, when we took the Silver Line, which is the BRT line, we caught it in the South Station. Now, this was underground, and you can't run a gasoline engine underground, so it was actually had an overhead connection. After it pulled out from underground, they disconnected that, turned on the gas engine, and pulled up to a traffic light. And once that light changed, as soon as they crossed the street, they were in a dedicated lane all the way to the airport. The advantage, if you have ever taken the Boston Rapid Transit to get to the airport before that, you had to get off of the commuter train and walk a long distance, and now I guess they use a bus pickup, take people. But the BRT was able to basically just pull up to each terminal and let people out. And that to me was a tremendous advantage. I carried luggage on that long corridor, and believe me, that's no pleasure. If any of you have questions, we're going to ask you to step up to the mic.
But also the money. And is there stimulus money right now that we can use? Is there going? How are we going to get this money? And what can people do to help?
The cost of warehousing humans if you think in terms of the, let's say whichever street you're talking about, figure out how many people live there, how many of those are out of work, and you're beginning to realize that $500,000 a mile is cheap in comparison to the cost. That cost is year after year after year. It's not for 1 year.
My question is, why must we ignore in our planning rail transportation when the country's attuned to it, and most of the experts say this is where the real movement can go?
Costs between $60 and $80 million a mile. If you want to run light rail all the way from downtown Detroit up through Oakland County, that will cost about somewhere between $1 billion to $1.5 billion. In stages. If we want to have a light rail corridor or several light rail corridors, the way to do it is start with entry-level rapid transit that we can afford, learn how to run it right, build ridership, then get to the next level, which is BRT. And BRT to light rail is not that much of an increase because it would be the same kind of routes, it would be similar stations. All you would be doing at that point is putting rail down. But you're building it in a logical manner, and it would be easier to get federal funding if you prove that you've got a successful ART corridor. It'd be easier to get funding for BRT, and if you've got a successful BRT corridor, it would be easier to get light rail funding. That's the logical way to do it. Now,
I'm going to make a suggestion. Each of your cities has some kind of transportation organization. Too often, the organization is basically middle class, whatever. And I believe that groups like Michigan Welfare Rights need to have a transportation committee, and we do. But what is our purpose? Several things. One, Mr. Swadek and Ms. Gutman's organizations need citizens to support what they want to do. They have concepts as to what is needed, and they need people behind it. It is better to have two transportation grassroots groups. One of them that is centered within the poverty community, for the simple reason that they're going to ask for different transportation solutions. We've got an organization in Detroit that is pushing basically for light rail. That's not a grassroots solution. The grassroots solution is BRT and ART. Poor folk can't afford to be pushing for the real expensive stuff. You came here to work on something that can benefit your community. If the poor do not get involved in the transportation issue, they're not going to get the transportation they need to get to jobs. An example, let's say that Detroit already has the system going out to the suburbs. We don't, but let's say we do. An ART line that is entirely within the city is subject to the votes of the people who live in the city. Nobody can stop it if the city wants to do it. And that's part of your job, is to start advocating for a system that will help eliminate the poverty instead of just, face it, Detroit is a warehouse right now. we're basically nothing but poor people. Got a few rich folk. But the overall thing, it's falling apart because it's being left to fall apart too much. If any of you are from Detroit or Detroit area, I suggest that you go over to Central Methodist, up on the 4th floor to Michigan Welfare Rights, and say, I'm here to sign up for the Transportation Committee. And Wendell will be glad to meet you, and so will I. Quentin, you others. Helpful. True, Transportation Riders United here in Detroit, but there's another group that may have an Ann Arbor chapter, and that's Synergy. They deal with a number of issues. Transportation is one of the issues that they deal with. And I believe that Moses out in the north suburbs, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Ruth Johnson from Transportation Riders United. I'm an organizer and assistant director. The executive director is Megan Owens, and first of all, I'd just like to thank the panel for bringing to light some of the issues and the questions and just the participation of the people here. I do want to clarify two things. Mr. Kavanaugh, you said that TRUE doesn't have low-income members. We have members and supporters from a lot of segments, although we don't target any particular income group. And we're willing to work with other organizations. I think it's great that we have several organizations that are either dedicated to transit or as part of their mission, like Moses has adopted transit as an important part of their mission activities. The other thing I wanted to clarify was you said that TRUE, I'm assuming you were referring to TRUE instead of other organization, was pushing for light rail. I would say that was 100% correct. We want a regional transit authority with following the 2035 transit plan that would have a variety of options, good options, well-financed, well-organized, that meets the needs of a lot of people in the community. Both those who are transit dependent, those who ride because of either they're too old, too young, or financially unable, and that could be anybody in this room. You could break your leg, lose your job, and become transit dependent, or those that we refer to as more of choice. So, in this day and age, the lines between those two groups is somewhat blurred. But I think what's important is to have the education, the advocacy, and the real active involvement and engagement of a variety of people in the community, so we have the best options available. Even with the light rail, we want the best options so it's a good project and it can be used as a springboard for future projects. We want a system rather than isolated projects because we think it would be better for getting the federal funding and be able to raise ridership. And I think there is some truth that we need to help develop a culture of public transit. So that is the education and the information. But I would hazard to say that it may be some non-traditional means of education and information rather than it's wonderful to have open houses and meetings, but sometimes you got to go to where the people are, the barber shops, the beauty shops, the nail shops, things like that. And because we're a small volunteer organization, we have to do what we have to do in terms of getting, we have people out at the fireworks with flyers about the RTA, the Regional Transit Authority. But I encourage anybody who's local, including the gentleman from Ann Arbor, to visit our website, DetroitTransit.org, sign up. If you just want to talk to 3 neighbors about public transit, we can give you the materials and help support you in that. If you want to make a presentation to your community group or your faith-based organizations, anything like that, we'd love to work with you. Again, my name's Ruth Johnson from TRUE, Transportation Riders United. I don't have a question, but I just wanted to clarify.
The most creative method that I can recall being done here in Detroit was when Tommy Meadows and a group put their wheelchairs in front of the bus to keep it from moving. That got attention. They have a good committee in TRUE that deals with riders' issues. Most organizations, when you're dealing with poverty, there are so many things, so many jobs to be done that it's almost impossible to take on the rapid transit issue. In Detroit, Michigan Welfare Rights is dealing with utilities issues, housing, and it is dealing with transportation. But basically, because I went over and I said, hey, this is an area, and they said, okay, you can do the work. We're glad to have it. The problem in most cities, from the point of view of those who are poor, is that it's hard enough living, letting alone trying to organize for each and every issue. Most of the organization goes to the neighborhood, goes to their house, and simply don't have enough energy left. But we need to get beyond that. It's the only thing that creates jobs. Transportation is what creates jobs. If you go to New York and take the subway and you get off, do all of the people walking back and forth live on that corner? No. It's the movement through the city because of the rapid transit system that gives the illusion of vitality. If you stand on Woodward at 6:35 in the evening and look, and you can hear a leaf going straight across the sidewalk, or the lights flicking up down the street. It's the lack of movement. And that's the only thing that can revive the city. I remember when Mayor, I won't say which one it was, said, I'm going to bring jobs to the city. I said, no, you're not. Only rapid transit can bring jobs to the city. The mayor that was running, or the person that was running against him, was a former police officer. Very good police officer. I voted for him, not for jobs. I figured if there's one thing a good cop can't stand, it's a bad cop. And he would clean up the police department. It's a different way of voting, I guess. I don't know. Rapid transit is something that I will vote for. They do an honest job with regards to what this country needs in terms of transportation. Thank you.
He gave you is the most important one. The rest of the stuff is information that it would be helpful to have. This is another technical thing that was put together. The man that did this, by the way, is the one who actually invented the concept, and it's very simple. I'll explain it while we're going. But it is a way to serve a community that ordinarily would not get any kind of rapid transit whatsoever, because rapid transit can cost too much. And they will not waste money on poor people. One of the critiques I have of the way they're handling the social forum is that there seems to be an argument between the Detroit people and the national. The only reason I say that is that when I went to get the key to this room Tuesday, there aren't any workshops today. And I said, this is the Detroit thing. Oh. And the only people that showed up seemed to be from Detroit. There were a lot of people who were standing around downstairs. And I really think that the reason that they came to Detroit was partly because we've got some rather unique problems that may overlap with their own cities. But anyway, thing that I am concerned about, and I'll give one item of background that might help explain it. I had an ancestor who was a member of the board of directors of the Western, that's Ohio, Abolitionist Society. His son married the daughter of a man that ran an underground railroad station. To me, it's the family business. They work to get people to Detroit. I see my job as trying to help people who came here get to jobs, because we're simply being unfair. That was born in their house, that they adopted because the mother died, and if they had not adopted her, the child would have been sent back to slavery. So somewhere I have some African American relatives, possibly, I don't know. I'm in a family business. They got folk to Detroit, and my job is to try to help. And I'm not, the real worker on that business, it wasn't whites. It was Harriet Tubman. She was the worker. All we were doing was helping. And that's the way I look at it today. I'm nobody's boss. I'm just a volunteer trying to figure out how to get some things changed. And there is one advantage. Because I am white, I can cuss the hell out of whites. I really can. Because if you said it, when I say it, one of my, he wasn't an ancestor, he was my grandfather's cousin, was a gentleman by the name of Charles Dewey Hillis. The Dewey part was Admiral Dewey. The Hillis part was my mother's family. He was a secretary, private secretary of William Howard Taft. He was the chairman of the Republican National Committee under Silent Cal. And some people said that Silent Cal, and he was the only one that Silent Cal would talk to. And since he had Quaker background, I picture two old men sitting there, and every third week one of them would say something. But anyway, the problem in America, more than anything else, is lack of sensible transportation. We've got all of these fine roads that are crumbling, and I pray for potholes, by the way. That's one of my favorite prayers. Pray for potholes. Because what I want to see is something that will help people rather than be just a toy for the people who have it. Our road system, that's a toy for people who have it. The ones that don't, to hell with them. That's what they're saying. They don't say the words, they don't have to. The action says it. And frankly, our country deserves to deteriorate. If we can do 7 Mile with a cheap bus that moves fast enough, then we can actually have everybody have part of life. The word equality comes from the word equus. It was the man who, or woman, no, man back then, who could bring a horse to war, equestrian. The one that you were equal if you could bring a horse to war. Otherwise, you were dirt. And that's the way we look at it today. There was a woman who died. I went to her memorial service. Her husband is part of this thing. Bill Wiley Kellerman.
His wife was Janie. And during her memorial service, they had a prayer that was like a poem. It had to do with the image of the rain falling on the furrows and life springing up. Well, it had to do with, basically with Hispanic concept, because it was written by a Hispanic, almost like a priest poet. But if you look at South America today, Chavez, Morales, Kirchner, Lula, and half a dozen other countries. These are people who are coming up. If you look at Haiti, I'm not talking about the government. The head of the Haitian Peasants Union is here for this U.S. Social Forum. There are women in Haiti, rural farmers. If you want to donate to something, go to a group called Grameen. Money goes to people to invest, people who are poor. It was started in Bangladesh, and it's a worldwide movement. But the idea is small contributions. How do you rebuild the world in small ways, not the big ways? Too many people think too big, and what they end up doing is messing it up.
It's the automobile industry that blocks the rapid transit. Not today, it did originally, but they've realized that they made a huge mistake. The biggest act of economic treason in the history of the United States was when General Motors bought 46 streetcar companies from different cities and tore them out. Detroit's streetcars are still running in Mexico City. It took 15 to 20 years for the businesses along the main streets to build up after they put in those streetcars. When they tore them out, it took about 15 to 20 years before those businesses all melted away for lack of customers. When you think of rapid transit, think in terms of the people who get off at a stop don't all live on that corner. It is the vision of people moving through the city that makes the city or a city look alive. If you take away that movement, people become afraid to stand on that street corner or to walk down that street. This is part of what we're talking about. Today, the ones who oppose the development of rapid transit are primarily businessmen who see it as an opportunity to make money. SEMCOG, Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, had visioning sessions. I attended all of them. They were in this building, maybe 15 years ago, 10 years, whatever. I came in figuring, okay, light rail. When I walked out of those meetings, at the end, I was a convert to what's called bus rapid transit. The difference between the Detroit River and the north end of Woodward Line in Pontiac is about 6 minutes between light rail and bus rapid transit. The difference in cost, light rail costs 10 times as much. You're talking, they could have done the entire metropolitan area for $2 billion with bus rapid transit at that time. And it would have cost $20 billion to do the same grid, and this is the grid we're talking about, really, more than anything else. This is the original SEMCOG vision. was called SpeedLink. A gentleman came in from the suburbs and set up a group called Transportation Riders United. Now, actually, it was his son that set it up. Transportation Riders United has its offices in the Guardian Building, a block or so away from here. Looks like an Aztec temple or something. A grassroots group does not have an office in the Guardian Building. You meet in people's homes, churches, community centers. They have a nice, fancy office. They took SEMCOG to court, and they argued that SEMCOG did not have enough representation from the city of Detroit, which is true. And we all think when they say that, well, they're talking about black representation. No. They were talking about representation of the businessmen downtown that wanted a toy called light rail. They got it. It's supposed to go to the boulevard. And I think some calmer people, cooler heads, may stop it. I don't know. Because it's a waste of money. It might be a good idea for the future, but you have to prove the need first. You don't just build something and say, oh, we need this. If they started with arterial rapid transit and bus rapid transit, built the system, and then decided we need to put in a light rail line on Woodward or somewhere, that makes sense. For one thing, you can build the infrastructure for it as you build the system. You've done half of your work that way. What they have done is to let the city continue to die on the outskirts while they're putting in their toy. And that's all it is. That's the way I look at it. That sounds rude or anything. I'm here to deal with getting a reasonable rapid transit for the people who live in Detroit and across the nation. I sent a recommendation to Secretary of Transportation Ray LaHood. I sent copies to each of the congressional chairs. I sent 2 copies, one to President Obama and one to Mrs. Obama. I asked the woman that was in charge of the Detroit planning for this, I said, does your group have a chapter in Chicago? And she said, yeah. I said, what's the chance of me getting one of these to Mrs. Obama? Oh, very good. When I went to get the address, she said, forget Chicago. Our chapter in Washington has direct access to the White House. It will be hand-delivered, which it was. I sent Mrs. Obama a second recommendation. It was a street in Chicago, South Chicago, where they live. From 95th Street north into the city, you have the Dan Ryan commuter train. From 95th south, as far as I could tell, all they had was just the regular bus bumping along. And I suggested that they try this bus rapid transit or this arterial rapid transit, on their, that section of, just as an experiment. In my last paragraph, I said, I suggest that you ask your mother to look this over because I am certain that that lady has ridden those buses. The reason that the only thing I want to mention from the technical aspects are the 2 things. The speed of BRT is close, so close to light rail that it's ridiculous. And the cost is so much different. But arterial rapid transit, what is it? It's a regular bus with traffic light override. That means it doesn't have to stop at stoplights. And it has stops every half mile to a mile depending on population. In Detroit, that would mean from downtown to 6 Mile every half mile. From 6 Mile to 8 Mile every mile. There's just not enough people in that area to warrant a stop. The difference in cost, $500,000 a mile versus 60 to 70 for light rail and 13 to 15 for BRT. They can afford to put it in neighborhoods that they could not afford to have it otherwise. Arterial rapid transit is not intended to replace either light rail or bus rapid transit. It's what it is. It says it's an artery that feeds into them. I went to a show and tell with Mr. Swadish, the man that developed this concept. And I said, oh, that's lovely. That's your $100 billion plan. He said, what do you mean $100 billion? I said, well, for everybody you leave sitting on a porch or standing on a street corner in the middle of the inner city, you have to feed them. It's called bridge cards or food stamps. You have to give them basic medicine. That's called emergency room. And you have to give them a place to live, even if it's a rat hole. And I left him at it. 6 months later to a year later, I went back for another show and tell. He saw me come in the room, he grabbed my arm, and he showed me this. The difference are these two lines. 7 Mile Road and 9 Mile would not have a rapid transit of any sort if it cost too much. Arterial rapid transit, the purpose is to feed the lines that are going out. Woodward here, Gratiot, Grand River. It's not a system going to the suburbs. It's a system going to the other rapid transit lines. Right now, they don't have any. And frankly, what they're probably going to end up doing is that grid there with 7 arterial rapid transit lines, because we ain't got enough of them. Oh yeah, we got the donut up in the city. That will be a great hub once the rest of the system is built. Until then, it's a merry-go-round. This line is in a suburb. Suburban politicians could stop it. This line is totally in the city. African American political clout is adequate to force this line. They don't have to get approval from the suburbs. And that is, to me, the biggest virtue. There's a line that's not on here. It's somewhere down in this area. It's called Verner. The street goes out. That's Hispanic. Goes through the heart of the Mexican town and so on and so forth. Arterial rapid transit is cheap enough that you can cover areas that you could not cover otherwise. We're inclined to think big, oh, it's not good enough. Actually, they're developing a bus. It's been designed. The company that was going to build it went kerplunk, so they never finished it. They haven't built a working model. It is a bus that is totally flat inside, no wheel wells, so that a person on a wheelchair or a scooter can go right on. A regular bus otherwise, with traffic light override and stops every half mile. part of the problem for humans is that we tire fairly easily, especially me. If you're bumping along and stopping every 2 blocks in order to get 10, 15 miles away from your house to a job, you can simply be worn out before you even get started. And there are a lot of people who give up. People like to talk in terms of, oh, well, those lazy. The people who are saying, calling other folk lazy are gliding along on a light rail somewhere. If they understood the difficulties, they wouldn't be using such nonsense. But anyway, this is what we're talking about. It is the ability to get people from neighborhoods that are not easily accessible to transportation to get out to jobs. What happens if they do that? Once you get a job somewhere, you take this somewhere along 7 Mile and then you come to Woodward or Gratiot or whatever, and you get out to a job, the first thing you do when you're paid is to bring that check back into your neighborhood. We don't have to have the degrees of poverty that we have. This is the mechanics. A lot of you work on poverty issues. Unless you have this tool, you're butting your head against all kinds of walls. This is a tool. 10 times $500,000 is $5 million. The number of people in that area, and always work in the demographics. How many poor people? How many are you warehousing? Because that's your evidence. If you can go to a city council or whoever and say, this is what it'll cost, and this is what you're paying now, because you don't have that. You're talking probably the difference between $100 million a year versus 5. You've got to count everything. Emergency room use, food stamps or bridge cards, housing, and all of the different services that you have to give. The cost of your rooms is part of the cost of poverty, and it's not necessary. This tool is one that if you can use it in a way that can actually enhance your city, you've got to a point where you're building an entirely new life for the area, for the city.
Congressman on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee who are pushing for upgrades of the rail lines because they want to use rail to move freight and get the diesel trucks off the road. It's part of the thing to reduce greenhouse gases because the diesel trucks in LA County, because of the Long Beach ports, diesel trucks account for 42% of greenhouse gases, and that's in a small area. So one of the ideas is that to improve the freight lines, and I know that there are several of the Congress people who are making deals up in the Northeast to try to get more and more of the push to electric trains is the ultimate idea, but the rail lines. So if they succeed in that, I don't know. I'm sorry that I don't know how much freight comes through Detroit, but one of the things that it will do is it'll upgrade the train lines all over the country because freight will get priority.
Yeah.
We have killed Detroit. They did it in 1946, I believe, when GM bought those lines. And they're still riding in Mexico City. That's where, I don't know how many people there are. There are millions of people there. Used to be a couple million here. Hmm? I'm misunderstanding that.
Mexico City has one of the largest populations in North America, or an urban center.
But I think they might have lost to São
It is-
Paulo recently.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, huge. Yeah, I think it is 20 million people in Mexico City. That's huge.
I always thought it was about
Well, you know, depends on how, it always depends when they do those population growth. It always depends on how far out they go and start.
While you're mentioning that, the first system in the world that was entirely built as bus rapid transit is a city called Curitiba in Brazil. They have since gotten to a point where they realize they need some light rail on a few of those lines. I'm not arguing against light rail as an idea. I'm arguing about it in terms of when to build it. If you put all your eggs in that basket at the beginning, you ain't going to get no more eggs because you're killing your city to do it.
That's what we're fighting in LA because we have the bus rapid transit and we have the arterial rapid transit. We have, you know, the feeding into the lines, but the problem is that our mayor's in love with subways in one of the most seismically active regions in the entire North America, but he loves the subway openings. So one of the things they're doing is they're trying to pull all the money from the bus system because we just got Wilshire, the Wilshire corridor is the busiest bus line in America. And in fact, I think both north and south as far as boarding. So we just got approval for a bus-only lane, which is going to take that rapid bus that goes from downtown all the way to the beach, and it's going to make it take half the time it takes now, which isn't very long. Because they have one that only does like 6 stops. So you can get all the way in LA. I don't know how you guys know. LA is big, spread out. So, I mean, I've taken from downtown to Santa Monica Beach on the regular rapid takes about an hour and 20 minutes in LA traffic, which is, you know, legendary. The 5 or 6 thing, you can do the whole thing in 25 minutes. Yeah. And they are going to put a bus-only lane for rush hour. So that's great, but that was, we had to fight to get that past him because what he wants to do is take 380,000 service hours from the buses to pay for his subway to the sea, which, as you said, it costs 4 times as much for each mile as it does to just include, you know, to do the buses. And also, he doesn't realize that they're fighting to do whether it's light rail or they're going underground, because in order to get from downtown to the sea, you have to go through Beverly Hills, Westwood, and Brentwood before you even hit Santa Monica, which is known for how pretty it is. None of them want them digging subways.
Let me ask you a question in Los Angeles that is really not served at all, where you have a lot of power.
Crenshaw. The Crenshaw, they want a light rail. They have a very inadequate rapid transit thing, because unlike the rapid transit in the other parts of the city, it actually stops earlier. It has, they do what they call short line, where it doesn't go all the way to the end of the line. So it more often stops right in the middle of the line, which makes it horrible to have to travel on it. But because Crenshaw, the congresswoman in Crenshaw, talking about the supervisor, has fallen in love with the idea of light rail. But the problem is, in order to do light rail, then you start worrying about, there are laws about how big the street has to be. And these are houses that have been in families for since the 20s and 30s. So in order to build it, they would have to buy the houses at a discount, tear them down to widen the street in order to get light rail. A rapid transit bus, all they have to do is paint, stick up a new stop for it, and change. The bus will do all the work because the bus has the light, change the lights. So.
Yeah, when I lived in LA, they had, back in the 70s, they had just the bus line. And so it would take me, I lived in kind of downtown, it would take me hour and a half. And then when I went back to visit a few years ago, you know, the rapid bus, I mean, to get down there in half an hour.
Yeah,
Just
it's really fast, much faster.
went by.
Two questions. One is it's easy. Arterial rapid transit would certainly help.
Yes.
Now, narrow streets, along the line, they thought they needed. One street was typically dedicated to buses going one way, and the next street was dedicated to buses going the other way. Rapidness. That makes sense to me.
The problem is that it would be lovely, it would make sense, it would be fast, it would be efficient, it would help every business along that street, which is, a lot of them are still family owned. But you have to get the people in Los Angeles out of their cars, which is, you know, ask them to give up their firstborn. But, you know, it's just, the problem is, and right now, I mean, Crenshaw is an old street. It's barely a boulevard. It's not, you know, compared to like like Santa Monica, they expanded. It's like 5 times as wide. The problem is that Crenshaw is barely wide enough for them to put in it. They can't put a bus on the way. It's too narrow, most of it. So you can't really do it for just buses, though that would be nice. But that's the problem. Like I said, the idea is the light rail will have to run down the middle of the street, but even so, because of the restrictions, the federal restrictions on safety, gates, and all that stuff, they would still have to get some of those neighborhoods in order to do it. But like I said, a rapid transit line that actually had service hours would actually, you know, just make it go all the way to the end. But buses aren't glamorous.
These are kinds of questions that you're going to find in any city. That's what the nits and grits of the business. But the potential of solving poverty, not totally. I don't think, as what Christ said, you'll always have the poor with you. There's probably some truth in that, but we sure don't have to have as much as we have. We could build systems that were designed to help people rather than to make money for companies that build light rail lines. To me, light rail is a waste until you prove the need. And even then, you know, here in Detroit, they always say, well, rail is permanent. My answer is, yep, dig down underneath the streets of Detroit and you find miles and miles of rails that used to be trolley tracks.
You know, thinking of Detroit and all its crap, but what I'm also thinking is what are the other things that make a city livable? Because some of our streets, you think of pedestrians and bikes, and we have, you know, 10-lane streets people cannot cross. You know, a couple years ago on Gratiot Avenue, 2 little girls trying to get ice cream, killed them trying to cross the street. You know, Woodward Avenue, these are not pedestrian friendly at all. You know, and so somewhere in the mix, thinking on how to, you know, make things just livable, you know, and so it's a whole part of the mix. I don't think we can just focus on the fact that we need buses and dedicated lanes, but, you know, what do you do when you get off the bus and you got to cross Woodward or Gratiot or something?
Woodward, you know, they narrowed it down to 2 lanes while they redo the street, the boulevard. And for the most part, that handles traffic, you know? And then but they're still repaving all 8 lanes. So, I don't know why they couldn't have turned, you know, one whole lane or something into a bike path, you know? Because, like he's indicating, cities in South America, taken whole sections and turn them into multi-use lanes.
Well, that's one of the things that Van Nuys Boulevard is really, really wide, and the street lights, the pedestrian walk sign is like 23 seconds, and that's like a clip for a really healthy young man, run across the street. One of the things they were talking about was putting an island in the middle for the bus-only lane, but also to put street lights, so that you're cutting it in half. So you only have to get to half of it, and then you got the island, and then you only get to the other half. Because, one of the things when we went to Washington, D.C., we were trying to cross one of those streets, and these streets are nothing. And it was like, you got 60 seconds to cross the street, the little lights just looking at it. It's like because all the, the politicians, it was like by the Senate building, all the politicians crossing to get their lunch, I guess. 60 seconds to get across the street that's half the size. And, you try to cross Wilshire Boulevard, and you got, 20 seconds. So, that's also something you have to consider.
And I just watched what people do in Caracas. And I was totally amazed. They would walk out, traffic going every which way, and people would walk off the curb, start walking. And how they made it to the other side, I have absolutely no concept. I know that I didn't do that. I didn't do that. I was too afraid.
Yeah, your concept of articulating the bus on 7 Mile. I started working at 7 Telegraph this week. And from New Center, there's the Imperial Express, which hits the lodge, and it drops me off, and I get there about 30, 35 minutes. Coming back, but it only runs in the morning and in the evening. And so you have to catch it, before 5:30 coming back. So one day I didn't catch it coming back. And so it took me 3 buses and 3 hours to get back. And I was like, I'm not doing this again.
And the purpose of that 7 Mile thing is not a rapid transit system that you usually think of, because most of your rapid transit go out to the suburbs. It's a setup in order to get you to those lines. It doesn't have to do with the rest of the things. And because of that, my bet is that they would be talking in terms of overlapping bus schedules, so they could add an extra bus or so on during rush hour, morning and evening. It would be the same type of setup.
Well, in thinking of bus systems that work, like Ann Arbor's bus system, works really well because all the buses converge at the terminal, and they'll hold the bus for 3 minutes, I think. But after that, they're gone. So you've got good connectivity. I think all the maybe 5 buses are on the same schedule. And smart.
And you always have to consider the people who don't work the traditional 9 to 5. Detroit's a city. There's got to be people who work from 6 a.m. to 3. And
it is.
Yeah, and you get I know that I worked retail for 10 years in LA, and my companions on the ride back, all the retail workers who get off at 9:30 to 10, all the restaurant workers, the early, and that doesn't even count the bartenders and stuff who are on their way to work, so they were, because one of the things the bus riders union had to fight, they wanted to take out service, as they called it, which was from 10 to 5 a.m. And that's where they always wanted to cut. It was like, what about all those people? Because when I got out of work, I was getting to the bus stop at 10 a.m., 10 p.m. I don't want to wait 45 minutes for a bus that, on a dark street. So, it's these, one of the things that has to be considered when you put these transit lines in is that you have to consider the population that doesn't work 9 to 5. Or, God forbid, you work late one night and it takes you 3 hours to get home.
I understand. I used to be a factory worker, get off at 11:30 and see the tail end of that bus go. And when the guy would be going back, he would give me a big smile.
Bus driver always left, about 3 to 4 minutes before he was supposed to. And I wrote a letter to the company explaining the schedule.
It's after 3 instead of 2 minutes before. And the next time that I was out there, she said, "Are you the one that wrote a letter?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said to the people behind her, "This is the man that's making you late for your connections." And the next day, or 2 days later, there was a car parked right next to the spot, where, the stop. And so I stepped out into the street figuring, okay, she's going to have to stop. She turned a hard right and tried to hit me. When I got on the bus, I got back on the curb, and when I got on the bus, she had a huge grin. But this is the type of problem that you're talking about. It's due to, I'm trying to get it just at least for the working hours. In fact, I had a friend who's a bus driver that was planning on coming today, and what I was going to do is ask him to go over some of the problems, logistics of the difficulty. The impresses me the most, now I'm not sure how good the coverage is, but it's San Francisco. And the reason is because of the amount of money that they put into the system. In Detroit, the city or the state, whoever, contributes $19 per citizen. In San Francisco, it's $119 per citizen. The difference from the point of view of people who live there, I stayed at a home of a couple of friends, an apartment, and they were going out of town for the weekend. I stayed. I was going to a conference there. They have one pass that covers the subways, not BART, not going across, but subways within the city, trolley, and buses. $27 a month. Last I had a pass like that here in Detroit, it was $45 a month. And that's been quite a while ago, so I suspect it's more. Those gentlemen each owned their own car. It was parked 6 blocks away. But they were able to really maneuver in that city for basically $27 a month. And that is what every city should be like, in my opinion.
They're trying to increase their bus
Yeah.
pass and get rid of the student. You can tell I've been doing my homework. Transit, the 84% of the transit systems in the country are doing service cuts and fare increases. They are actually trying to take the San Francisco system to court because they want to get rid of the student pass. Because you're right, their pass has always been really affordable. And with a city the size of San Francisco, it covers everything. But the problem is that they want to either do fare zones, which would increase the cost, or eliminate the student pass entirely. And people are trying to fight that.
That's also the basis of San Francisco's economic success.
It's their transportation system. The problem in Detroit and in many cities throughout the country, I keep going back to 1946 when General Motors bought up the streetcar systems, and basically the economies of those cities went downhill It took about 15, 20 years to get to the point where this country was as bad as it was. If I were able to, I would dig up the remains of Alfred Sloan and burn them in effigy, and I would sue his family for every dime plus interest that he left them, because he's the person who pushed that concept. We're going to force people to buy cars. And what they did instead was to destroy the American economy to the point where a lot of folk can't buy cars. That is stupid. And that is the problem right now. BP, it is stupidity. At least the communists had sense enough to know they were idiots. In our country, our system believes, oh, we're the best. No. We're destroying in entirely new ways.
They obviously have a system that requires a lot of money. $27 a monthly pass probably doesn't cover all the costs of running that system. So I'm just curious about how they fund a system so that it's affordable to the people who use it, because obviously they're not paying the full cost of the system.
San Francisco made a very intelligent economic decision. Their whole economy depends primarily on tourism. And so they set up a transportation system to serve not so much their own citizens as to serve the people who come into town. You could get that kind of a thinking in other places, but it requires a mentality that doesn't think in terms of, well, we can't afford this, that, and the other thing. Right now, they're debating whether or not to stop the stimulus before it's done its job. FDR, the only dumb thing that he did was to listen to the Republicans in 1937 and cut back, and the economy went right back down into the Depression. And that's going to happen here now. I can see that.
They have gas tax, don't they? I mean, don't they adopt the Regional Transit Authority? I don't know how much leeway you guys have to change the tax. Because I know they voted a sales tax in California, so that a 0.5% of the sales tax goes to the transit, theoretically. So the problem is they were talking about the gas tax, which pays for transit in most of the country, with the hybrid cars and the more efficient, people driving less because they're broke, you know, the gas tax is dropping, and they haven't come up with a way to refund all these transit systems without that gas tax. That's what the federal surface bill is trying to do, but they don't know where to get the money from.
The question in my mind, when they talk in terms of all of these chopping up of taxes, is whether or not it wouldn't make sense to do everything by basically an income tax, including corporations and so on, and graded. Now, I'm not talking 90% from corporations. They tried that. It was a mistake. They gave them all kinds of exceptions. I'd rather see a 45, whatever. And for the individual, 20, 25, whatever. It depends on the ability to pay, but it also depends on having sense enough to figure out what you have, what you need, and budgeting for it. A family sits down and says, well, we've got to have this much money for this, that, and the other thing, and you may pay the bills. In this country, what we do is we argue. Oh, that we can't raise taxes. That'll, discourage investment or something. Let's raise the sales tax because they don't eat any more than a poor person. It's a stupid way of running a business. Thank you.